message today is called A Soft Place to Land. And the description is when we literally or metaphorically fall, we often suffer. But you know, we're capable of navigating suffering. We have within us a capacity for compassion for ourselves and others. The question is, when we or someone we know takes a fall, is our consciousness a soft place to land? So I had done a whole lot of research and had a lot of facts for y'all for this message, and that I've been working on for some time now. Reverend Janie asked me to come speak some months ago. She's actually asked me to come speak a number of times, and there was always something until I realized 3 years had passed since I had been in San Angelo. Yet, if you ask anybody back home in my new home, San Antonio, about my feelings about this place, they would say, they would say how much I missed you and how wonderful I think you are. I'm delighted to be back in this wonderful place, and I regret letting so much time pass. Why would I stay away so long from those I consider to be my tribe, who always gave me a soft place to land? The important part is I realize this, and I'm here now. And you may or may not get to hear all this great research, because someone whose opinion I value very much just suggested I speak from the heart, so that is what I will do. Myrtle and Charles Fillmore, co-founders of Unity, they corresponded by letters for a time before they were married. At one point, Charles mentioned in his letters to Myrtle that she kind of had a unique understanding of the divine. And ever since I first read this quote in the story of Unity by James Dillett Freeman, it's really stuck with me. And so this is what she wrote back to Charles. She said, "I am decidedly eclectic in my theology. Is it not my right to be? Overall is a grand idea of God, but full of love and mercy. Call it by what name you choose, the soul understands it." And when I read this quote, I knew in my heart I landed where I should be. I'm not sure I was at the forefront of my mind when I read the book, but I knew I needed a spiritual home where there was some wiggle room. Our thoughts, feelings, and ideas, and the words we use about the divine evolve and change over a lifetime. But the soul knows deeply, and perhaps this unchanging understanding is what we strive to capture in words. It is an impossible task, yet we strive to make meaning as human beings and communicate that meaning. Charles Fillmore understood this. There's an oral story relayed over and over again in Unity that at a lecture there was a student who questioned a statement he had made. Charles Fillmore asked, "Well, wherever did you get that idea?" And the student replied, "From one of your earlier writings." Charles Fillmore reportedly replied, "I reserve the right to change my mind at any time. I am decidedly eclectic in my theology as well. I'm certain most of us in this room are. And because of some recent experiences, my mind has been changing too. So all this to say, I may share a thing or two that might seem different than the theology that you've cultivated in Unity. And some of it is not by the book Unity thinking. I'm going to work from the assumption that because Unity falls under the category of new thought spirituality, there's some room for new thoughts. So be informed. Some of what I have to say today is based on the world according to Jennifer Shawker, some people know me as Birdie, guided by her innate wisdom and perhaps not by the book Unity teachings. Thoughts are formative and creative, so if what I share does not resonate with you, please take what you like and leave the rest. I know this community well enough that if my thoughts fail you for some reason, you will be gracious enough to give me a soft place to land. Now, I don't like to make Sunday messages all about me or my story, but I've had a few recent experiences that are probably highly relatable. Or if they're not, a time will come in your life when they are. Eventually, we all suffer. If not from an illness, then from the loss of someone we care about, a divorce, loss of a job, income. Suffering is pretty universal, is it not? So for those who follow me on Facebook, you know that several months ago, I fell down some stairs. And there was no soft place to land. Physically, or in my consciousness. Now, if any of you are new to Unity, when you hear the word consciousness, you can just read awareness. And in my consciousness, there was some rigid, almost fundamental meaning-making, kind of based on Unity thinking, but kind of twisted up in the wrong ways. My consciousness was pretty much as hard and cold as those tiles I landed on. Now, healthy 48-year-old women do not randomly fall and badly twist their ankles. There is usually a reason for it. The reason was discovered, and it was a problem with my spine. I was confined to a wheelchair and still use it for long distances. There's a reason this chair is here. I might need it at some point. So I use the chair when I'm interning in the hospital as a chaplain now, making up all the hours I missed from falling in clinical pastoral education. The people in my life and at Unity of San Antonio were wonderful. When I learned I'd be in a wheelchair for at least 8 weeks, my heart really sank. I mean, the implications were very broad, but I was really worried the most about my job. How was I going to do my job on Sundays? Our campus in San Antonio is pretty broad and large. There's 2 buildings. I go back and forth from maybe a dozen times on any given Sunday. I had to ask for help, which was hard. Nobody likes to lose their independence, right? So I sent out an email to the congregation saying, help, basically. I asked for a Sunday helper for the next 8 weeks, and I had all 8 slots filled in a half an hour. My church family did things like make sure I had a Thanksgiving meal, and just did a lot of the things I just simply couldn't do. But my consciousness was still not a soft place to land. I was thinking some of the things that people just think when they're sick. In Unity, we might think, what was I thinking about? What was wrong with my consciousness that I might attract this experience into my life? Outside of Unity, people might think, what did I do to deserve this? If God is loving, why would God send such an experience to me? In Unity, rumination about what we might have been thinking or doing that attracting such an experience to us is called metaphysical malpractice. Have you heard the word before? Raise your hand if you've heard it. A few? Okay. In my pastoral role, ministering as a chaplain, I've heard people talk about it a lot, and it's heartbreaking. And the funny thing is, even though I knew I was engaging in metaphysical malpractice, I was at a loss as to what to do otherwise. No talk I'd ever heard a minister give fully addressed the topic of metaphysical malpractice, or really gave much advice as to how to cut it out. Always mentioned as an aside, all I remember being told to do is just not do it. There was no magic formula or advice as to how to deal with metaphysical malpractice. Now, where this metaphysical malpractice word comes from is rooted in our third Unity principle, sometimes known as the law of mind action. Only kind of you may disagree with this, kind of a misunderstood or twisted understanding. The principle is that our thoughts tend to shape our experience of the world. Sometimes it is put, thoughts held in mind return after their kind. And a lot of people take this idea quite concretely. And they think that everything that happens to them is as a result of their thinking. Paul Hasselbeck in school one time put it to me this way. It might be better to think of it as thoughts held in mind return like thoughts. So if we're thinking about something such as love, like love thoughts are going to produce. The principle he explained in a class I took works largely on the level of consciousness. Jim Gaither, another teacher of mine, made a really important point to me about all this in an email because it is my biggest gripe in Unity. He wrote this: "My understanding of the law is related to the implications of Jesus saying, 'Ask and you will receive.' Now, Jesus did not say, 'What you have in life is what you have asked for.' The saying implies you can change your conditions, but not necessarily that you caused your conditions. This is the difference between looking at the law as a way to explain all things and looking at the law as a way to change things, to cope with things." But y'all, I was so hard on myself, and I could not hide the fact that I was sick. I had this wheelchair, and here I was in the church, and I was full of shame over it. Unnecessary shame, to be sure, but just something that's drawn from our way of thinking in Unity far too rigidly. And even our leaders go through this, because I called a few. And in some ways, it's harder for leaders because they are considered examples as to how to live our Unity principles. So if you're going through something like this, be assured you are certainly not alone. and then, y'all, I developed shingles. Yeah, it was the pits. And it was an interesting experience because it happened at the church. I was in my car, getting ready to go home, sitting like this. And I was hurting so bad. Sometimes, I guess, apparently the pain happens before the rash, and I got to experience it that way. Yay! And I'm in the car, and the pain is so bad, I'm wondering if I'm dying. And I thought, okay, I'm going. And I'm good with my maker, you know? And about 15 minutes pass, and there's tears rolling down my face. I'm like, I'm not going anywhere. So I call the board of trustees who thinks I'm in the next room. And the first time the person I called thought it was a pocket dial. So they didn't come. So then I called the minister, and here's the entire board of trustees, and I'm in my car, and they're holding my hands, and I'm weeping, and it hurts every time I breathe. And they're calling an ambulance. Boy, I couldn't have been more vulnerable. And they were so good to me. They came to the hospital and everything. And now we can look back at it and laugh. And we certainly weren't thinking about metaphysical malpractice at the time. It was just honest love and concern. I'll never forget having one hand to hold of the person on this side of my car and the other on this side. We are forever bonded from that experience. We regale each other's stories from that experience. And I think the reason I developed shingles, I could be wrong, but there was a lot of stress living as a differently abled person in a challenging educational endeavor such as CPE. When wheeling yourself into the office is a huge chore, I suppose that might happen. Ramps for wheelchairs are often incredibly steep. I don't know how they expect you to push yourself up some of them. Doors are often impossibly heavy, walkways too narrow, and even sounds travel differently down there. It was really scary at first. And at some point I did lighten up a bit. I made jokes that all I could see from down there were people's legs and backsides. Y'all, I have seen far more buttocks than I've ever imagined I would have in my lifetime, or necessarily want to. And some of the things people said to me I took quite personally. And looking back, I know they were expressing concern and trying to make us both feel better. But I share the things people told me as a cautionary tale, because they were pretty much cold comfort to me, and they might be cold comfort to someone else. For example, the universe must be telling you something. This one, you guys, I couldn't believe. You have to slow down, or the universe is telling you to slow down. Why would you tell somebody in a wheelchair they have to slow down? They are so down already, I assure you. How much longer are you going to be in that chair? Oh, you're going to get a lot of spiritual lessons out of this. It looks like you need to work on your consciousness about this or something. Really? The universe must be trying to teach you something. Now, I'm not faultless in all of this. Some of these things I've said to people myself in the past. I have certainly stopped. Not only are they cold comfort, the idea that the universe or God is some kind of cruel school teacher, metaphorically slapping us on the wrist with a ruler to teach us a lesson is pretty theologically unsound to my mind. Amen. So, truly, there was lessons in all of this, but it was only because I chose to pay attention and take them in. It was a work of my consciousness. So initially, I was very angry about the comments people made. I didn't like them one bit. However, people will always do such things, unaware they might be hurtful. They think they're being helpful. Mostly when they do this, they are distressed at seeing the suffering of another, and they are comforting themselves. My suggestion is that if you ever find yourself tempted to say something like this to another person, perhaps see if there's something you could do to support the person, like simply listening or rearranging a room so that a wheelchair can get through with ease. People are people, and they will probably always do this. So I had to really think about how I was going to cope with it, and I discovered a Zen story wherein I discovered my new reply next time something like this occurs. Because when you have something going on with your body, a health challenge, everything changes on a dime. You go to one doctor and they say one thing, you go to another doctor and they say another thing. So I love this story. There was an old farmer who worked on his crops for many years, and one day his horse ran away. Upon hearing the news, his neighbors came and tried to comfort him. Such bad luck, they said sympathetically. Maybe, replied the farmer. The next morning, the horse returned, bringing 3 wild horses with it. How wonderful, the neighbors proclaimed. Maybe, said the old man. The following day, the son tried to ride one of the wild horses. He was thrown off the horse and broke his leg. And the neighbors came again to offer their sympathy at his misfortune. Maybe, said the farmer. The day after, the military officials came to draft the young man into the army. Seeing that his leg was broken, they said, no, we're not going to draft him. And all the neighbors came out and said, yay, what a great thing. And he said, well, maybe. So my new reply is maybe. In a pastoral sense, being in the wheelchair changed everything. The people I served in the hospital, I think they shared a little bit more with me than they would have had I been this bedside clinician just kind of hovering over them. Having been a nurse and now a chaplain, I can tell you that from the other side of the bed rail, someone standing over you just kind of looks distant and cold. To get down on the level of the person who is sitting there makes an instant connection and a vulnerability on the part of both parties. And I'll never forget the patient who just poured their heart out to me, and he points to my wheelchair and he's like, you get it. And I did get it to an extent. That empathetic shared space while dark and sad and downright painful, had a sacred beauty to it. There is great benefit to leaning into our pain, especially when shared with a safe person. And for me, the future is still unclear, but my hope is to continue to uphold that safe, sacred space. I think that kind of compassion for others is, in part, the cure for metaphysical malpractice. And the other essential remedy is compassion for ourselves. So now I'm going to quickly give you a little bit of that research so it doesn't all go to waste. Some of this is Metaphysics 101, and some of it is my own meaning making, because Reverend Paul Hasselbeck says this: perhaps events don't so much happen for a reason as we are here to give reason to an event. In our metaphysical textbooks, we talk of there being one power and one presence in the world, God, and God is absolute good, correct? So when we speak of the absolute, we're speaking of the highest, purest, unchanging idea of God. As the absolute, no one can ever be sick, poor, or anything less than perfect. So our human experience is known as the relative truth, where things change. One can know sickness, poverty, war, and the like. I like to call it the complicated truth. And this is the container for pain and suffering. The understanding of our second unity principle is we're not separate from God. We're not separate from the absolute, that perfect experience. We're extensions and expressions of the divine. And it is said that all ideas are divine ideas, and they have their beginning in the mind of God, but somewhere along the way, as we co-create with God, things get really messy. Ellen Davenport points out in her book that the creative process is messy. Just visit an artist that's doing a painting. Even when I'm creating a digital picture, there's tabs open all over the place. My computer's a mess. Co-creation is messy. But none of this is particularly comforting, is it? When I fell and sprained my ankle, my metaphysics textbook, it was not on my mind. Nor is it on my mind when I sit at the bedside of someone who is ill in the hospital. That would be cold comfort indeed. Now, at those times, I'm usually full of feelings. And that is appropriate in the realm of things that change, in the container for pain and suffering. These times are ripe with opportunity. The opportunity to access the absolute and show up as divine, as we like to say in unity. Now, showing up as divine doesn't look divine all the time. Sometimes we put this showing up as divine and it's supposed to be some great accomplishment. In my personal theology of pain and suffering, after sitting at the bedside of others and falling ill myself, I think showing up as divine doesn't look like much of anything, maybe other than sitting up at the bedside, even though it hurts to get up. Or gratefully and gracefully asking for help. Or just the victory of getting through a doorway that is not wheelchair friendly. Deciding to clean and organize the one thing that you can clean and organize, the bedside table, is totally divine to my mind. Showing up as divine can be the honest teardrops that won't stop falling when someone realizes the full life-changing implications of a diagnosis. And as the chaplain who listens to that person voice their concerns and feelings, I could go on with any number of little situations that present the opportunity to show up as divine. And sometimes the mark is missed, situations arise and are handled poorly, or not at all by those who could show up as divine. But in the container for pain and suffering, we need not fear. Things are always changing, and life is full of do-overs. Things will most certainly change, and the opportunity to show up as divine and be compassionate, be a soft place to land for ourselves ourselves and others, will present itself to us over and over again. I just have one last sentiment for you on the subject of falling from the poet Rumi. He writes, "The way of love is not a subtle argument. The door there is devastation. Birds make great sky circles of their freedom. How do they learn that? They fall. And in falling, they're given wings.